I didn't think my HOA would shut off my electricity for a paltry $60 fine, but their petty power trip became their worst nightmare when my cousin's TV news team recorded the entire ordeal live. How would you push it if your homeowners association attempted to leave you in the dark? The thud of my mailbox rang out like a gunshot across my front yard. I pulled out yet another envelope with the dreaded Pinecrest Village HOA logo. My stomach tightened as I ripped it open right there on my driveway. Notice of violation, $60 fine, immediate payment required. I almost choked $55 for what my eyes scanned, down to find grass succeeding height regulations by 0.5. Enlisted as my grave offense, half an inch. You've got to be kidding me. I've been doing double shifts at the hospital all week, hardly had time to eat, let alone care about my lawn being a little overgrown. I looked over the street where Sandra Wilkins was watering her immaculately manicured roses. She hastily looked away, but not before I saw her smug smile. Of course, Sandra, the self-proclaimed neighborhood watchdog and secretary of our HOA board, had likely used a ruler to measure my grass while I was working inside my home. I hurled the notice onto my already large stack of bills, because since my husband Dan departed 6 months prior, money had been scarce. My nursing pay paid for the essentials, but these arbitrary HOA fines were driving me into the ground. My daughter Lily's asthma meds, in and of themselves, cost a small fortune, even with insurance. I called the HOA office and was set on combating this outrageous charge. Pinecrest Village, HOA, this is Carol, one of the board voices, answered. Hi, I just got fined for my grass being half an inch too tall. That is excessive and all, especially because I wasn't even given notice that there was a problem before I was fined. Carol sighed. According to our revised bylaws, we no longer need to warn before issuing fines for offenses against the norm. Section 8, Paragraph 4 of the new agreement you signed. New agreement. I never signed anything changed. I objected to board-approved changes last month. Notices were sent to all residents. I later looked in my spam folder and found it a 47-page PDF of new regulations buried between advertisements for diet aids and Nigerian princes. Who actually reads those? Which evening, while assisting Lily with homework, a knock surprised us. At my door stood Marcus, my old neighbor from 2 houses down. Evening. Rachel, he said, leaning prominently on his cane, needed to alert me. Sandra's on the warpath. She got me last week for having my trash can out. 4 hours too long, cost me $75. That's outrageous. How can they keep raising these fines? Marcus shook his head. Been worse since that new board president came in. Richard Walters, big shot real estate developer. Rumor is he's using our fines to pay for the fancy clubhouse renovation. Nobody asked for. Can they even do that? Asked. Been wondering the same thing. My nephew's Apargal says some of these rules may not be legal, but fighting an HOA is costly. After Marcus had left, I tucked Lily into bed and remained awake. Researching proved Marcus to be correct. Most HOAs misuse their authority, but fighting them takes money and time. I did not have even, so I refused to pay this unfair fine. I fight the board at their next meeting instead. The week after brought additional issues. My air conditioning broke on the hottest day of the summer at a cost of $400. I hardly had. Then Lily required an emergency inhaler refill when her asthma worsened due to the heat. By the time the HOA meeting rolled around, I was drained, stressed, and far from in the mood for Sandra's attitude. The community center hummed with tension when I walked in. Around 20 neighbors sat in awkward plastic chairs, while Richard Walters, a smooth man in a pricey suit, convened the meeting to place. Sandra sat next to him, clipboard in hand, shooting disapproving looks at anyone who whispered when they opened the floor for resident issues. I raised my hand. The chair acknowledges Rachel Thompson, Richard stated with practiced solemnity. I stood, voice calmer than I felt. I'd like to talk about the new fine structure. Many of us weren't adequately informed about these changes, and some fines are excessive, such as charging $55 for grass being half an inch too tall. Sandra's mouth pressed into a thin line. Property values are based upon neighborhood standards. If we start making exceptions, I am not requesting an exception. I interrupted. I am questioning whether or not these rules are reasonable or even legal, and I'd like to see the financial records demonstrating where these fines are going. The room remained silent. Richard cleared his throat. HOA. Financial records are available by appointment office hours. Excellent, I said. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon after the meeting. Several neighbors came up to me, whispering their own Joe horror stories. Ellen was fined for having a bird feeder. Miguel had to repaint his door because the shade of blue wasn't approved. Even Mrs. Jenkins, who'd lived here 30 years, got a violation for wind chimes. Sandra cornered me as I was exiting. You're making a mistake, Rachel. She spat. The board doesn't like troublemakers. I'm not being troublesome. I said, I just want transparency. You should pay attention to taking care of your property rather than challenging authority. I see your holiday lights are still on the back patio from last year. That's another infraction. My jaw tightened. Thanks for the heads up, Sandra. I'll be sure to take care of that right after I go over those financial records. The next day I went to the HOA office during my lunch break, only to see a note on the door office closed for emergency maintenance. How convenient. Water that night when I was assisting Lily in watering our little vegetable garden. I saw Sandra gazing at us from behind her curtains. My phone vibrated with an email alert. Another HOA violation notice for unauthorized garden structures with a $75 penalty. The stakes were being raised, and I had the feeling this was just the tip of the iceberg. As I put Lily to bed, she asked plaintively, Mommy, why is that lady always so mad at our home? There are some people who like rules better than human beings, sweetheart, I replied, kissing her forehead. Little did I know in the morning I find out exactly how far Sandra and the board of the HOA would go to keep up their image-perfect neighborhood, and how it would make a half-inch of grass become nothing at all. Bright red letters glared back at me from my front door. Final notice stamped over an official look document taped there to be seen by all my neighbors. I tore it down hastily, checking to see if anyone had seen this public humiliation. Pay all outstanding fines within 48 hours. $130 total, or else face heightened consequences as allowed under HOA bylaw section 12.3. My hands trembled with rage. The amount had increased by over twice the original fine, and what precisely were heightened consequences, the notice failed to indicate, which appeared to be done intentionally. I phoned the HOA office straight away, after having been put on hold for 17 minutes. Richard Walters himself picked up the phone. Rachel Thompson. I was expecting your call, he said, his tone oily. What's this? Final notice. I've been attempting to examine financial records for days, and now suddenly I owe $130 with loose threats. Nothing loose about it. Richard responded quietly. You've amassed several infractions now. Original lawn height non-payment of initial fine within grace period, unauthorized garden structures, and as of yesterday, inadequate storage of recreational equipment. Recreational equipment? What are you talking about? Your daughter's bike could be seen sitting in your front yard for more than 4 hours. Section 9.2 explicitly states, every recreational equipment must be kept hidden from public gaze. My blood absolutely boiled. She's 7 and just learning how to ride a bike, and someone's obviously keeping an eye on my residence to record these so-called transgressions. The board has made neighborhood compliance monitors perfectly legal. I took a deep breath. I demand a formal hearing with the entire board, and I still haven't received those financial records. Fine hearing granted for next Tuesday. As for records, our treasurer has been ill now. Inside of me, really, I've been investigating, but there's so much technical legalese. Amir nods. HOAs have authority, but there are boundaries. Do you have copies of all these violations? I indicated my expanding file as he perused them. His scowl deepened. Several problems here. He grumbled. Not enough notice, arbitrary enforcement, potentially unfair fines, and this surveillance of your property constitutes harassment. What can I do? I can't have a major court fight. Let me assist with the hearing. I'll prepare you on what to state in the meantime. Document everything. Take dated photos of your property. Daily record any encounters with board members. Retain all communications. That night I had slept better having an ally, but my respite was fleeting the next morning. I found Sandra in my front yard taking a picture of my house with a professional camera when she spotted me. She did not even try to be doing something else. Excuse me, what do you think you're doing on my property? I demanded again. Still in my bathrobe, Sandra smiled icily, public documentation of frequent violations. I'm more than within my rights, as compliance monitor, not on my private land without permission. You're not the easement runs 15 feet from the street, she replied. I'm inside that space, as we tussled. Lily showed up at the door, muddled by the ruckus. Mommy, why is that woman screaming before I could respond? Sandra took a photo of Lily. Something inside me snapped. That's it. You do not photograph my child without consent. I stepped between them, blocking Sandra's camera. Your emotional display is disturbing the peace, Sandra said. Backing away, that's another violation. I was about to respond when my phone rang. It was my cousin Jenna, a reporter for Channel 7 News. Hey Ratch, just checking if I can still borrow your folding tables for tomorrow's community event we're covering. We'll be in your area shooting a segment on summer heat safety. An idea struck me. Actually, Jenna, there might be another story you'd find interesting right in my neighborhood. Can you stop by this afternoon? Sandra's eyes widened as she overheard. She quickly retreated to her car, but not before I saw concern flash across her face after explaining everything to Jenna. She was intrigued. Homeowner associations pushing the limits is not new, but this amount of surveillance and harassment would make an interesting story. Would you be doing it on cam? I hesitated, concerned about without blowing things further. Let me take a think. The hearing is tomorrow morning. Keep in touch, Jenna said. Meanwhile, I'll research on this HOA and its directors. That afternoon, 4 emails from HOA, each with a new violation and associated fines. My total was now over 300. This was absurd. I called AIR in a panic. They're piling it on, was in the email newsletter. All homes with pending violations. Receive follow-up, INSPCS. Jenna moved forward, microphone in hand, as Dave positioned the camera on his shoulder. The red light on the recording device flashed on. Good afternoon, I'm Jenna Rivera with Channel 7 News reporting live from Sycamore Heights. She went smoothly, as although this had been in the works all along. We're here today reporting on what seems to be an extreme instance of HOA over. Sir, you're with the Homeowners Association. Mr. Walter's eyes shifted uncomfortably to the camera. This is private association business. You can't shoot here, actually. Jenna responded. We're on a public street, and we've been invited by the homeowner. Would you mind telling us why you've disconnected electricity from a single mother's house for a contested $60 fine? We used proper protocols. He stuttered. Suddenly, less assured, Miss Thompson has repeatedly broken community rules. Could you outline these transgressions? Jenna pressed her grass, exceeded height restrictions. Her recycling bin stayed at the curb after collection time. There were children's drawings on her driveway and overnight packages left on her porch. Diane interrupted, reading from her clipboard. Jenna's eyebrows went up, and for these small problems, you felt it was okay to cut off basic utilities to a house where a diabetic child resides, a child whose life-sustaining medication must be refrigerated. Fred's face went white. I wasn't told about any medical necessities because they never inquired. I said, coming into view, they never even formally informed me of the new grass height restrictions. I got one nice notice 2 weeks ago, and then a loose warning regarding consequences stuck on my door. Dave panned across the increasing throng of neighbors, many of them agreeing. Jenna turned back to Mr. Walters. Sir, I have here a copy of the state utility protection laws that explicitly state that even when HOAs have disconnection clauses, they need to give clear written notice and cite specifically utility, disconnection as a possible outcome, and allow homeowners at least 7-day grace period to resolve the matter. Mr. Walter faced our legal counsel. Advised legal counsel. Mrs. Jenkins cut in from the crowd. The board told us last meeting that we couldn't afford legal counsel this year. That's why you raised our dues. A murmur rippled through the gathered neighbors. Suddenly, Sandra emerged from her house, marching toward us with her phone held out like a weapon. She's been breaking rules for months, Sandra declared. Walking straight into the camera's frame. Look at these photos. Her son drawing with chalk a delivery package sitting on her porch for 3 hours. Her recycling bin out at 7:30 p.m. When the rules clearly state it should be removed by 7 p.m., and you've been photographing my property and my child without permission. I asked the camera, catching Sandra's moment of realization that she was now live on local television. That's what neighbors are supposed to do. Sandra insisted, "Keep the neighborhood nice." Mr. Walters said, "Vigilance is key to maintaining property values." Mr. Walters' Jenna pressed, "Is it standard HOA policy to encourage neighbors to surveil each other?" No comment. He muttered, attempting to retreat toward his car, but the crowd was growing larger. Maria from the end of the street stepped forward. They threatened to tow my car because the temporary tag was unsightly. While I waited for my permanent license plate, she said directly to the camera, "I had to park 3 blocks away and walk home with groceries in the rain." Jason's father added, "They fined me $100 for having an unauthorized gathering when I hosted my son's Little League team for pizza after they won their championship." More neighbors joined in, each with their own story of HOA harassment. Fred, the nervous board member, broke away from Mr. Walters. "I didn't know about any of this," he insisted. The president and treasurer handle most enforcement actions without full board review. "The treasurer?" Jenna asked, "and who is that?" All eyes turned to Diane, who was trying to slip away unnoticed. "Miss Thompson." Jenna said, turning to me, "You mentioned earlier that you found it suspicious that your HOA fees increased twice in the past year, despite no visible improvements to community amenities. Do you have copies of the financial statements?" I nodded. I requested them 3 times and was told they were being prepared. That's around the time the grass height rules suddenly changed, and Sandra started taking pictures of my yard. Mr. Walters lunged forward. "This interview is over. You're trespassing on private property. We're on a public street." Jenna repeated Cly as Dave kept the camera rolling. The mayor's office called the station. During the live broadcast, the producer relayed through Jenna's earpiece that they were sending a representative to investigate the situation. "We've just received word that Mayor Collins has directed the city's Consumer Protection Division to launch an immediate investigation into potential abuse of power by the Sycamore Heights HOA," Jenna announced. I noticed Sandra slipping back to her house, her husband Doug waiting at the door with a concerned expression. Within 30 minutes, trucks from 2 other local news stations arrived. My phone, which I'd managed to charge in Jenna's news van, buzzed constantly with messages from friends who'd seen the broadcast. Most surprisingly, a representative from the power company appeared, clipboard in hand. "Miss Thompson," the woman called out, "I'm Laura from Citizens Electric. Our president saw the news segment and sent me personally to restore your power immediately. He also asked me to inform you that we'll be reviewing our policies regarding HOA requested disconnections," as the utility worker headed toward the electrical box. Mr. Walters made one final desperate attempt. "This is all a misunderstanding. We were simply enforcing community standards that everyone agreed to." Jenna held out her microphone. "Then you won't mind showing us the board meeting minutes where these enforcement actions were approved? Or the certified letters warning Miss Thompson specifically about utility disconnection?" His silence was answer enough as the lights in my house flickered back on. The neighbors broke into spontaneous applause. Tyler, who had arrived with Jason's family during the commotion, ran to hug me. "Mom, are you famous now?" he whispered. I laughed, relief washing over me. "No, honey, I just stood up to bullies. The story was me, but for now I had my power back both literally and figuratively, and judging by the determined expressions on my neighbors' faces as they exchanged contact information and planned an emergency community meeting, Sycamore Heights would never be the same again. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. The video of Mr. Walters stammering on live TV had spread faster than wildfire in July. I sat on my couch, lights finally back on, watching my story play out on the evening news breaking tonight. Sycamore Heights. HOA cuts off residents' electricity over disputed $55 fine, the anchor said gravely. The camera cut to Jenna standing in front of my house. I was here to film a completely different story when HOA board members arrived to conduct what they called a routine inspection. What happened next shocked everyone. They showed the footage again. Mr. Walters' face draining of color when he realized he was on live TV. Sandra bursting into frame with her damning confession. My cell rang. The mayor herself was calling. "Miss Thompson, this is Mayor Garza. What happened to you is unacceptable. I've directed our city attorney to review the HOA's authority immediately. I thanked, still trying to process everything. My social media accounts were flooded with messages from strangers sharing their own HOA horror stories. Local reporters were requesting interviews. 3 different lawyers had offered free consultations. A text from a blocked number appeared. "You'll regret this." I knew it was either Sandra or Mr. Walters. But I wasn't scared anymore. I was winning by nightfall. A crowd had, who I hardly knew, appeared on my front lawn. Neighbors brought food extension cords and stories forward. Mrs. Jenkins from 2 streets away contributed homemade lasagna. They fined me $200 last year because my Christmas lights were the incorrect color of white. She said, squeezing my hand. I was too embarrassed to struggle. Jason and Maria came across the street with a casserole dish and resolute expressions. "We've begun a petition," Jason demonstrated, giving me a printout. "We require 75% of homeowners to assign to compel a special election for a new board, and we're currently at 50%. Maria contributed, smiling. "No one likes bullies, particularly when they see them exposed on TV. Sandra's house was dark, curtains closed. Her husband's car was absent from the driveway. My son Tommy came back from his friend's place where he'd been living during our power outage. His eyes widened at the little party in our living room. "Are we having a party?" he asked. "Sort of." I smiled. "We're having a meeting to improve our neighborhood." Someone had brought a portable projector, and Maria's husband, an accountant, was displaying all of our slides of the HOA financial reports he'd asked for. Months prior, examine these figures. He indicated administrative costs rose 340% since Mr. Walters came on board. But there's no detail as to where that money went. And look at the timing of when fines began to rise. A collective gasp filled the room as he displayed a graph showing increased fines with massive withdrawals from the HOA account. "I've been following this for months," he confessed, "but I was too scared to report it by myself." Tommy pulled my sleeve. "Mom, everyone is so upset." I knelt beside him because sometimes people forget that rules are meant to be helping, not hurting. In addition of a knock on the door, unveiled more neighbors, the Patels from the corner house, and Mrs. Johnson, who was an old lady who lived on the other side of the community pool. We saw the headlines. Mr. Patel related the same thing to us last summer. They shut off our water for 3 days for a disputed fine for having the wrong color mulch. Mrs. Johnson agreed, and they threatened to put a lien on our home because our grandson's basketball hoop was visible from the street by midnight. We had 37 households' testimonies recording the same abuses. Maria's husband had set up a shared document where people could add their experience. The patterns were undeniable as the people finally went home, vowing to come back tomorrow with more signatures. I checked my emails to get a note from the HOA's lawyer. It began with threats of defamation, but concluded with an invitation to explore resolution avenues. They were frightened. I crawled into bed, tired but optimistic, when my phone flashed with a message from Jenna. "Check your email. You need to see what I discovered." There in my inbox was a newspaper clipping from 5 years before, concerning Mr. Walters' former neighborhood where he'd held office as HOA president until he'd suddenly quit amidst allegations of misappropriation of funds, history repeating itself. But this time he'd chosen the wrong individual to bully sleep. Came with ease that night, with the soothing hum of my refrigerator in the background, a noise I'd never considered so comforting. I dreamed of community gardens and neighbors greeting hello, of reasonable regulations and respectful discussions. I dreamed of victory, and when I awoke the following morning to discover an envelope so crowd, I sat in the front row between Tommy and Jenna, holding a folder packed with papers, bank statements, violation notices, and most crucially, a copy of the state statute capping HOA powers order. "Please summon Judge Reynolds," the retired judge who resided in the Blue House on Pine Court. The community had requested that he moderate the emergency meeting. "We'll start with the agenda. First item, vote on temporary board members." What transpired next happened so quickly. It was like watching a movie on fast forward. The community voted in 5 interim board members: Maria, Jason, Mrs. Jenkins, Mr. Patel, and Judge Reynolds himself. Each pledged transparency and fairness. When it came my time to talk, I made my way up to the mic with trembling legs, but a strong voice. 6 days ago, I was standing in my dim kitchen, trying to figure out how I'd maintain my son's meds at refrigeration temperature. I started today. I'm here standing before you, all knowing that we've powered on a different type of electricity, the electricity of neighbors together. I told what we found: the pattern of increasing fines aimed at particular households, the secret clause regarding utility disconnect connection, and the mysterious international bank account created 3 months into Mr. Walters's presidency. The lawyer cut short: these allegations are baseless, and indeed, possibly actually. Jenna stood up, pressing play on her recorder. I have the previous HOA treasurer on record, affirming unauthorized transfers. A hush came tumbling over the room when we heard the admission by a man who had been brushed aside when he challenged Mr. Walters' bookkeeping at the close of the meeting. 3 resolutions were voted in unanimously. All the fines incurred during the last administration would be re-examined, and in all likelihood refunded. The utility disconnection clause would be stricken out of the bylaws once and for all, and a complete financial audit would be performed by an independent company. As people filed out, many stopped to thank me. Some shared more stories, others just wanted to introduce themselves properly. Neighbors who'd lived near each other for years, but never really talked. Tommy tugged my hand. Can we go home now? I'm hungry. Home finally felt like the right word. Again, walking back, we passed Sandra's house. A for sale sign had appeared in the front yard. Her curtains parted slightly, and I caught a glimpse of her watching us. I didn't feel anger anymore, just sadness that someone could copy added change. Longest, unedited part, if so close to others, but feel so isolated that reporting violations was her main interaction with neighbors at our front door. I discovered a tiny potted plant with a note for your garden. Better days ahead, the Johnsons. The following morning, my doorbell rang early. It was Maria with a thick envelope. You won't believe this, she said. Spreading papers on my kitchen table, we discovered where the money went. The documents revealed that more than $300,000 of HOA money had been redirected to what was described as landscaping services performed by a business named Evergreen Solutions, but there was no Evergreen Solutions except as a shell company listed to Mr. Walters' brother-in-law. The county prosecutor would like to speak with us today. Maria explained, this is not just HOA overreach any longer. It's fraud. As we sat talking next steps, Tommy called from in the front yard. Mom, come quick. I ran out of the house, afraid of another tussle, but found instead an incredible scene. At least 20 neighbors with plants, soil, and gardening tools, busy assisting one another on each other's lawns. We thought that we'd meet the landscaping requirements for everyone. Jason showed me digging a hole for a little flower bush, but doing it the fun way, alongside Mrs. Jenkins demonstrating children how to sow sunflower seeds. The Patels were dispensing homemade lemonade. Even reclusive Mr. Finian, who did not often venture outdoors, was meticulously pruning roses. That day, I had received an email from the county prosecutor verifying Mr. Walter had been taken in for interrogation. Attached was a subpoena for my testimony. In the next case, 6 weeks. From now, I stood on a small platform at the newly refurbished community center, cutting a ribbon to open Sycamore Heights' first community garden, constructed on land previously set aside for an unnecessary HOA office expansion. Judge Reynolds, now the official HOA president, handed me the scissors. Some leaders rule with fear and control. He said to the collected crowd, others set an example and inspire. Thank you for demonstrating the difference as children played in the garden pathways, and neighbors exchanged tips on growing. I saw a familiar figure at the periphery of the crowd. Sandra's husband, looking uneasy but resolute. He moved cautiously. I wanted to apologize before we proceed. Sandra isn't well. Hasn't been for a long time. That doesn't justify what occurred. But I wanted you to know she's receiving treatment now. I nodded, respecting his bravery. I hope things improve for both of ye.